Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. I am Polly Byers, and I am the Executive Director of the Karuna Center for Peace Building, and we really appreciate you all taking time today to learn more about Karuna and help us broaden our network. And just as we're starting, I wanted to note that we are recording this. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can turn off your video or change your name, whichever, but we hope you'll stay. So I think we'll go ahead and look at the agenda, our first slide here, which is pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you a brief background on Karuna for those of you who don't know too much about us and may not have been here at our last meeting. I know there's some of you who know it very well. And then we're going to turn to our two speakers, Liz Hume and Seth Karamage, who are going to talk about the power of dialogue, which is really the heart of Karuna's work. And then we're going to conclude with a brief discussion on how you can help us expand our network. So just to start off with, what is Karuna Connectors? You might be wondering. It's a new initiative, something we just launched. We've only had one meeting 2 months ago. And the idea is to provide an opportunity for a small group of interested people to take a deeper dive into Karuna's work and hear directly from our staff and our peace building practitioners about what the work looks like on the ground and in the field. At the same time, to help us expand our network and the support for the work. So moving on, who we are. Karuna began in 1994 when peace building was still like a nascent or emerging field of practice. I think it's the slide, not that slide, but the slide before. And it was founded by a psychologist in Amherst, Massachusetts, Paula Green, who may be joining us today. Karuna began its work in Bosnia and became known for its innovative use of dialogue as a tool to catalyze peace across deep divides and foster reconciliation and trust, which is, as you can imagine, by nature, a really long-term process. It was quite innovative in the time, but increasingly there's been a lot of study and research. It's really being documented to be a very successful approach. There are a lot more organizations now that do peace building. It's now a rather extensive field with a lot of different approaches and tools and evolving methodologies. But I would say Karuna is best known for really the deep transformative work that it's been engaged in since its inception. And you're going to hear from real experts in the field shortly. And because healing and rebuilding trust is so fundamental to working in conflict areas, our primary approach has been to integrate structured dialogue processes with different kinds of activities. It might be community-based healing and reconciliation initiatives, or early warning, early response interventions, which we heard about last time in Nigeria, advocacy for equal rights and social inclusion, among others. So that's sort of the nutshell, and you're going to hear really more about the heart of the work shortly. Moving to the next slide of where we work, if you can see this map and the little dots, which is where we've worked. So over the past 27 years, Karuna has worked in more than 35 countries, predominantly in Africa and Asia, but other regions as well. And the work obviously is tailored and very different depending on the different local context, whether it's Bosnia, Senegal, Rwanda, or Sri Lanka. And we focus on a lot of different kinds of divisions over the years. So in some areas or countries like Sri Lanka, the focus has been on religious divides, whereas in other countries, it's been on long-held ethnic tensions and animosities. I also want to just highlight that while much of Karuna's work has been on the community level, really at the sort of people-to-people level, building peace obviously requires work at all levels of society. And we also work with governments, with different civil society groups, religious organizations, war-affected communities, to build connections between and among these different levels. In some countries, we've worked more on the prevention side. Our recent work in Ethiopia was actually working on countering violent extremism in certain regions of Ethiopia, while in others, it's been focused more on rebuilding the social fabric after either genocides in places like Rwanda or Bosnia, or wars, or long simmering conflict situations like the Casamance in Senegal. So that's it for your brief little background. And I really want to move right on quickly to our speakers. So we're going to hear both from Liz Hume, followed by Seth Karamage. So I think I should have said this right at the beginning, but we are going to have time for questions and answers after they both speak. So please use the chat function as we go along, and we will try to collect those questions and ask them at the end. But we definitely are planning to save time for your questions. So I will introduce Liz Hume, who is the acting president and CEO at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, as many of you may know. Liz has enormous experience in policy advocacy and managing large, complex peacebuilding programs in conflict-affected and fragile states, and over 20 years of experience in senior positions in bilateral, multilateral institutions and NGOs. And she really has too many impressive accomplishments to name. She was seconded to the OSCE in Bosnia to work on the Dayton Accords. She worked for the International Rescue Committee in Pakistan and Afghanistan after 9/11. She helped to establish USAID's Office of Conflict Management and Mitigation. She's managed US conflict programs in Ethiopia. And she is now serving as the very dynamic head of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, where she seems to be everywhere, literally. Most recently, whether she's on panels, giving speeches, writing op-eds, it's kind of nonstop. I'm not sure if she sleeps. Most recently, she authored a chapter in a new book called Building Peace in America that looked at different examples of peace building and also dialogue. And she highlighted Paula Green's Hands Across the Hill project. And last but not least, most importantly, she is a Karuna board member. So with that, I am going to hand it over to you, Liz. And just remember to put your questions in the text. Okay.
So thank you, Polly. And also, when I was at USAID, it's when I got to work and know Polly. It was going back a very long time ago, so we won't actually say when that was, but that's where I got to meet Polly when we were both at USAID. So thank you so much for having me and having this really critical discussion on dialogue programs, looking at the United States, of what I'm going to be discussing. And I don't want to say I stumbled on it, but in about 2014, 2015, having discussions with Melanie Greenberg, the old CEO at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, we thought it was so hypocritical that we were looking internationally, but yet not looking in our own backyard as conflict dynamics were increasing significantly. I did write an article at that time where I used the conflict assessment lens that we had used, that we had created for the US government, and I applied it to the United States. And I got very little traction on this article, very little, until 2016. Got a lot of traction after 2016 and got a lot of calls to understand what was going on, what was driving conflict in the United States. So I did get a lot of calls. I got invited to a lot of events. And what I noticed that was happening in the United States were lots of projects and organizations popping up. And what you were seeing was really good. You know, there was already some good programming going on in the United States, but you were seeing some good programs, and then you were seeing some programs that, you know, it's fine if, you know, they weren't really accomplishing anything, but were actually doing harm. And that's where I got the idea for this chapter in this book. It's a book on US peacebuilding that came out. And I was invited to this conference where this book came out of it with George Mason University at the Carter Center. And I was kind of perplexed that I had to talk about conflict sensitivity in the peacebuilding field, because it is just something that we do. Now, it's not integrated in all sectors internationally, but, you know, for the most part, the peacebuilding field does adhere to a conflict sensitivity approach and understands that they have to look at the research and the evidence, and they don't want to do harm. So that was not the case of what I was seeing in the United States. You know, I found it actually quite alarming. And so that's what I did. I explained in this book what conflict sensitivity is, and just compared and contrasted two events, one or two organizations. And one had an event in Charlottesville that I attended. within the year of the events that had happened in Charlottesville. So you can imagine how raw it was. And I looked at Paula Green's work and the work that she was doing from Hands Across the Hill. So for me, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? I kind of just thought it was, it just is what it is. It's how we do our work. And if you're working overseas, you would be held accountable by donors for doing things that, didn't follow this principle. But that's the one concern I have right now. Well, I have many concerns about the US right now, but one of the major concerns I have is not, it's obviously about what's driving conflict and tearing down our resiliencies, but it's also the fact that donors are funding some of these projects that are based on people's good ideas that might work for them, but, isn't based on science. So, going through it, also at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, in our inaugural award, US Peacebuilding Award, we did give it to Paula Green to really, and she was highlighted on NPR for it and the New York Times, to really go through and say, if you're going to do this work and dialogue, do it the right way. So go in and follow the principles of making sure that people have the same power balances, that you're not going to go in and just start talking about what divides us, that you're going to form relationships, and then also talk about, so what are you going to do about it? So anyway, that's really the genesis of the article. It goes through and highlights the importance of doing this work and doing it well. And the book was reviewed by the Journal of Social Encounters. And one of the things that they said, they pointed to this chapter saying how important this discussion was on peace building programs in the US. And that there was very little background that some of these organizations were working on or working off of. So that's really something I've been talking with Polly about and others like Beyond Conflict, of how do we work together and develop these standards for the peace building field in the United States. It's not a given that people in the United States are following these standards, good peace building practices. And that's really, I think, the important part of this, but there's something new on this. And this is something that I started looking at right before COVID. Right before COVID, we sat down with people who had been working in DRC on Ebola. As many of you may know, humanitarians rushed in there and they were doing a lot of work on addressing the humanitarian crisis, the health crisis that was happening with Ebola in the DRC. There was a significant backlash on health clinics, doctors were killed, clinics were burnt down, and the humanitarians were really confused, like, why is this happening? We're here to help. So one of the things I did is sit down with our colleagues at Interaction and those organizations that were working there to ask also, what is the peace building field doing wrong? What are we doing? And some of the interesting things that came out is that we tend to kind of beat everybody up over it. We don't say, okay, so this is what you need to do. And a lot of times people don't want to talk about conflict sensitivity because they want to be neutral. So do we have to change our terminology? Is it okay to talk about risk? And not have to say the word conflict. So anyway, so that's really, I'm going to stop there to talk, so that, you can understand that in the United States, we have a lot of work to do on getting standards up in these practices. So it's on us to do it. But at the same time, it's also on donors to make sure that they're funding good projects. And I just saw a note, what does conflict sensitivity mean? And I'll tell you really quickly. It means when you go in to have an intervention, any intervention is going to have a reaction. It's going to have an action. So you have to play it out and see, well, what action is this going to have? And in the case study and mitigate it and manage it. in the case study that I looked at, I mean, that's really the simplest definition of do no harm or conflict sensitivity. The organization went into Charlottesville within, they were an outside group. They hadn't done the work that they needed. They were imposing their view on what should happen in Charlottesville. And there was significant backlash from the community. There was a lot of arguments. It created a lot of conflict. And today people still talk about that event as causing harm in the community. So that, that's the title of the chapter, Peace Building Programs in the United States First Do No Harm. And the great thing is Karuna knows how to do this work and to do it well. So in that regard, a really great partner in building US standards in the US and making sure organizations are doing an evidence-based approach and at the very least not doing harm. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you so much. That was terrific. And it's super, super interesting. And having been lucky enough to read your draft chapter, I mean, that Charlottesville example and the sort of the detail you went into about all the different aspects of that. I mean, it's just, it's quite an instructive case study, I would have to say. Anyways, I'm sure there'll be more questions, but I'm glad you answered that important question of what does that mean? Conflict sensitive is something that we all use all the time. And it's like, it's good to just be very clear about that. So thank you. So now we are going to hear from Seth Karamage, who is a beloved associate of Karuna's. He's a Karuna Peacebuilding Associate who's worked with us for many years. A dialogue facilitator, a mentor, an expert in the strategic use of dialogue in communities impacted by conflict. He is a technical expert in dialogue mentoring and training in our current program in Nigeria called Protecting Our Communities Initiative in Nigeria. We heard some about that on our last Karuna Connectors. He's also led community dialogue coaching for Karuna's Healing Our Communities project in Rwanda some time back. He is joining from his home in Rwanda. He did his graduate studies in coexistence and conflict at Brandeis University and has been working with UMass Boston at the Center for Peace, Democracy, and Development for 11 years, managing its peace building and governance projects in Nigeria and Rwanda, respectively, and has been involved in a lot of other interesting and powerful work. But with that, I am going to turn it over to Seth.
Thank you very much, Polly. Thank you very much, Karuna Center for Peace Building. And thank you very much, everyone here with us. I'm really very grateful for this opportunity today. Just listening to Liz talking, I felt like I wish this local chief from Nigeria, whom has been working with us or interacting with us in our dialogue forums, would have had her or read the book she wrote. Because when I really had her talking about imposing what the interests of, donors or principles of donors to the direct beneficiaries, that is what we do harm to the people that we are supposed to be helping when they're in conflict. This local chief from a state called Benue from Nigeria said recently, he said that the dialogue, reflective structured dialogue, is very effective in resolving land disputes because it doesn't cost you anything and the facilitators do not tell you what to do, but they just facilitate you to talk together and come up with your own solutions. So this is just a chief who is learning about this. He's an elderly person who has seen this and see it really resolving a lot of conflict that are religious-based, socioeconomically based, and so on. But we are so grateful to hear a person like this, talking that they don't like people imposing or telling them what to do. So thank you, Liz, for this. I'll keep building on this. Yes, we've been really happy and grateful to have this opportunity to implement these two wonderful projects in Rwanda and Nigeria. And for Rwanda, just for the matter of context, Rwanda is a country that was so much divided along ethnic differences. For those who might have read about it, it is a country that has two major ethnic groups, Hutus and Tutsis. And sometime back in 1994, we had a massacre that was really a genocide that almost claimed almost 800,000 people. So this is a terrible thing that befell my own country, but we are grateful that the country has now emerged from all these violences. And Karuna Center was lucky to have a project that ran for 3 years from 2016 to 2019. And this project was targeting more specifically the perpetrators and the survivors of the genocide. Why did we do this? We did this because the perpetrators of the genocide are now coming out of the prisons. They are coming back to their former communities, and there are some survivors in those communities. And these survivors are not ready to receive the perpetrators whom they know that they killed or they claimed lives of their beloved ones. And the perpetrators themselves too are not ready to see the survivors of the people they killed. So for us to promote and foster reconciliation, restoration of trust and peace among these communities, we had to come up with this initiative and Healing Our Communities project. So what happened here? We had to at least identify a few communities in about 7 districts of the country, picking from east, north, and southern regions of the country. So from this, we trained what we called community dialogue facilitators and formed dialogue clubs. And this one, how did we do this? We did what we call, bottom up, just building on what Liz was talking about. It's a bottom up approach, and it is the same thing we are using in Nigeria, whereby we do go to target communities after running a thorough advocacy with top level of government officials from provincial and local government district levels, and then they give us permission to go to those communities that we identify to be communities that need this direct support. So getting to the communities, we reach out to community leaders, and we sit with the community leaders. We tell them about the approach of dialogue, and we tell them how to work, and we ask them to identify those people they believe that they are pro-peace. They can at least be trained to be the dialogue facilitators, and that's how we do it. So from there, when we train them, then we start running the dialogues from those forums we establish. And we did all that, and what happened in Rwanda specifically, we started seeing perpetrators and victims of the genocide, sitting in this kind of forum, you see, just like in this picture on the screen here, standing up, hugging each other just because of this well-facilitated dialogue of not telling them what to do, but allowing them to be transparent and sincere to each other and give testimonies and apologize where necessary. So just to have an example of what happened in Gashora, it is in the eastern province of Rwanda, in Bugesera district, where one perpetrator stood up after several sittings in this dialogue and confessed. This is just one example. He confessed of what he did. And one of the perpetrators, a woman, stood up and said, I have been seeing this gentleman, Gahigi, as a killer, and I have never wanted to see him or talk to him. But with his confession and apology, because he was just kneeling in front of that circle of people you see there, and she said that, I now see you as a human being, but I've been seeing you as just a killer and a perpetrator, an animal, stuff like that. So from there, everyone started, crying and thinking like, oh my God, this is a magic. So we have seen this happening in several districts. where we were running this program. And what came as an interesting impact here, actually, we started seeing local government officials at the district level calling our dialogue facilitators, going to the district town hall meetings to facilitate, dialogues during commemorations of the genocide, because this is when Rwandans talk much about what happened in the country. Another one, we did actually, when the project was about to phase out, we did what we called a documentary film covering all the impact of our project. And after publicizing this documentary film, we started seeing the government from National Reconciliation Commission of Rwanda asking us for the permission to start airing out this documentary film on a national television and national radio, where they were calling the entire country to follow what Karuna Center has done through these dialogue forums. So this is something that really made us feel good, because at least the government had last heard from us when we were doing the advocacy at the beginning of the project. But then now they are using our tool, our documentary film, to promote more reconciliation, because there are a lot of testimonies from young people who were born even after the genocide, born from either the survivors or from the perpetrators, who were being told not to intermarry. But now, with all this, it is just going around the country and people are using it. So this is really good. We see that at least this is working. And we started from bottom, now going up to the national level, being used as a very good approach to reconcile people in such a divided country. Yes, that is all about Rwanda. And maybe I would talk a little bit about Nigeria. Nigeria, as Polly introduced, we are running a project called Protecting Our Communities Initiative. In this, we are implementing this project in 3 states, 2 in the northern part of Nigeria and another one in the middle belt, for those who are aware of Nigeria. And like I said, in terms of context, the conflict in Nigeria is very diverse. There are so many ethno-religious conflicts. They are everywhere in all the states almost. There are socioeconomic differences, violences, and religious violences, and so on. So for us, when we were designing this project, we focused mostly on farmers-herders conflict. What is happening here? Actually, farmers and herders are fighting day and night, and what they're fighting over is just, grazing zones where they would, rear their cows or cattle, and farmers also fighting over their farming lands. So it's just like a chaotic situation in there. But the good thing is that where people are thinking that where government has failed, nothing can be done, at least now we are seeing some good results of this approach of our bottom-up approach of reaching out to people. We did the same process of advocacy, identifying community dialogue facilitators, talking with their community leaders, identifying them. And the reason why we do this, actually, I forgot to mention this on the Rwandan aspect. We do not want any foreign person from any neighboring community to be a facilitator in a certain community, because we want them to own their process, own their conflict, own their resolutions, own their solutions. So when we get people from those target communities, it actually becomes much easier for us to work with them and get accepted by those that they are trying to bring together for dialogue. So that's what we did. And we have seen really community leaders, just like I started telling you about one chief who said that this reflective structured dialogue is very effective, because we have gotten leaders calling us, community leaders and local government leaders calling us really to actually help them to resolve conflicts that are beyond farmers and herders. We have seen farmers and herders sitting together and agreeing to form fences of herders so that their cows, they don't encroach on farmers' crops, because that's what they have been killing each other over. And now they hold their hands together and say, this is how we are going to protect our community. We are seeing people resolving land disputes, between farmers and farmers. We are seeing local government officials now calling us to help them train their local officials, to at least keep running these kind of dialogues. Recently, we got a call from Karuna Peace Commission. This is a commission that has been established by the state government of Kaduna. Kaduna is one of Nigerian states, and Kaduna is also one of the most divided states in Nigeria. So with this, they have a peace commission, and this peace commission is now consulting with our project. They are calling us to stand board to help them so that they can emulate the RSD we are using, because they have seen so many communities that we're working in now sitting together, resolving conflicts, using our early warning system and bringing it to the dialogue, talking about all those issues. And they see it working without us actually going to make any advocacy of getting their support. It is now them calling for our support. Same thing in Zamfara. And just let me land here, where we recently had what we called interdialogue between farmers and herders in Benue State. In this state, the farmers have an association. It's like a national structure. In every state, there is what we call Farmers Association of Nigeria, and there is also Herders Association of Nigeria. So in every state, there is that kind of structure. So we had a dialogue we facilitated between them, and for the first time, they were sitting together at our office, and they now agreed that they are going to work together and advocate for farmers to help herders advocate for unity in their state, and actually ask the government to provide subsidies to the farmers, to the herders rather, because herders, they are nomadic herders, they just move around. They don't have ranches. And for the farmers, at least for them, they're kind of a bit stable. They have their farms. But for this time around, they said that we need to see herders being stable as we are, getting all the benefits to get from the government so that they are not left behind. This was a success for us, seeing that at least for them, they can speak as one despite their economic differences. Maybe for now, let me stop here. I can keep talking about the interesting things we have learned from this kind of work we are doing in Rwanda and Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Seth, that was fabulous. I mean, it is, it's mind-boggling how powerful the work is. It really is. And I'm sure everybody can appreciate in both of those situations, obviously very, very different, but amazingly powerful. We do have some questions that we're going to open it up for questions. So put your questions down. I'm just going to ask, it's a prerogative of just asking the first one, and then we'll go to some of these other good questions I see. But obviously, it seems the preparation for the dialogue process and working with the leaders in a given community to choose appropriate facilitators, that's a really critical part of it. It seems that there's a lot of skill and sensitivity involved in that. I mean, because that sets the tenor for everything else. Who you choose. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that initial process when you go for the first time into a community, whether you're in Nigeria or Rwanda or any other country, of how, just a little bit of how you go about that process, and then we'll go to other questions.
Yeah. Yes, sorry, I really would have talked about this when I was talking about the conflict context and how do we bring people together. What is so important in our dialogue approach is to prepare participants. Preparing participants means, understanding the issue that people are going through or what they are fighting over. So how do we do this? just talking with the community leaders and the dialogue facilitators, sometimes they propose the topic or the theme or the issue to dialogue about. When they propose that, they just decide that this is what is so pressing on outside. And they will take that. Taking that, then they decide on the date and the venue. The venue has to be neutral if it is an intra-dialogue or an inter-dialogue between different groups of people in the society. All that, we just talk with them for almost 2 weeks, making sure that this is something that belongs to them, they own. And after that, then we ask them, who do they want to be part of this kind of dialogue? Who is concerned? Who would be the influential person? Who would be the most concerned person? Then they identify them. After identifying them, then we facilitate them to send out interviews when it is just at the beginning. And after that, then when those people receive the invitations, then we start helping the dialogue facilitators to run pre-dialogue interviews. This is what we call a pillar of the success of our dialogue approach, pre-dialogue interviews, where we sit with every single person, asking him or her, what is your concern? What would you like to see in this dialogue? Do you know that this person is going to be part of this dialogue? What are you expecting? What do you like? What don't you like? What should we be very careful about? And then we propose what we call communication agreements in addition to interviewing them or interacting with them before the dialogue. We tell them that these communication agreements will help us to feel equal. And we explain them. There are about 7. We explain them, talking, sharing time, respecting one another, no interrupting. There's so many, I think most of you here know about all this. But these are things that most of these communities we are working with are not used to, because they are used to, top-bottom approach of, society governance. And the way they do it is just to instruct. So they get surprised when we invite them for such a dialogue, and they feel like, yes, if I'm young or older, I will also have, equal respect or consideration despite my hierarchy or my position in the community. So this is very important. That's how we prepare them, so that for them to come, they know that at least everyone will be listened to, and that makes them very excited. And we see them showing up for all these dialogues. So basically, that's how we do it. And of course, we tell them about what we call confidentiality, because most of these communities, there are so many members that are traumatized with the past experience of the conflict they have been going through. So a lot gets shared in these forums, and we prepare them to make sure that they understand that whatever they don't want to be, brought to the public will be kept within the room, and it makes them very happy. And they always know that the facilitators will just guide them, but they will not instruct them or tell them what to do. And this is what makes them very, very excited. Basically, that's how we go about it. And then when they come to the room, the process takes itself, and you see them talking together as we planned it. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that's really interesting, because it's obviously there's a lot involved in all of that you've just gone over, in terms of sort of laying the groundwork and building the relationships and the trust. And so I think that was really interesting just to hear a little bit more of what that actually looks like. So I'm going to turn, we've got a number of interesting questions that we will just try to go through. I also just want to note that Linda Trop, who has a professor at UMass here in Amherst and has worked with Rwanda, has put in the chat, because she's worked with us on evaluating some of the work in Rwanda, in collaboration with us, that has a forthcoming book that she has cited here. So I just wanted to note that is in the chat. Thank you, Linda, for being here and putting that in. So turning to a couple of questions, Megan is asking, Megan Bosch, who's on our board, in your experience, how do Rwandans feel about their military's involvement in pushing back insurgents in Mozambique? What effect is that having on domestic politics and the national mood more generally?
Should I respond now?
Sure, why don't you respond now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you, Megan, for a wonderful question. This is a question that I'm not sure I'll give you the right response. But as a Rwandan, I will speak as a Rwandan, but not just as a dialogue facilitator here. So basically in the country, the mood is good. And recently, His Excellency, the President of Rwanda, visited Mozambique, went there to boost the mood of the soldiers on the ground. And we see an interesting relationship between the country. We don't know what this will bring in terms of, strengthening the stability of the country. I mean, Rwanda. So, but what the politicians planned, I think they are successful on this. And for the citizens, they think that, yes, if other international, superpowers of the world can go and help one country, why not Rwanda if it can do that? That's what is being said here, even on the media. So people are saying that, yes, go for it, Rwanda, go for it, Rwanda. So the mood is very high. That's what we are seeing. And the president feels like, yes, he's leading Rwandans to do what they're happy with.
Okay. Okay. Diana is asked, how do you address power imbalances? I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, but in a dialogue process, when you've got people, very different hierarchical positions, but trying to give everybody a voice and creating sort of an even playing ground. How do you deal with that?
I loved this question because it went direct into what I was referring to as communication agreements. These communication agreements, we make sure that every single participant understands the essence of every single communication agreement. I'll just mention only one. And where we say that we shall speak for ourselves and let others speak for themselves. When we go further to explain this, it means that if you are going to represent a certain group, please indicate that you are now putting on a cap of representation. But in this kind of forum, we would like people to speak from personal experience on the issue that people will be discussing about. Because when we invite, actually, we do not invite group representatives. So we do encourage people to really speak for themselves and respect the airtime that is allotted to every single person. So with this, when we also encourage people not to interrupt the speaker, except to indicate that you've not heard what the speaker is saying. In most of, the forums or gatherings where people meet, you will find that people of high hierarchies actually try to dominate, to dominate the audience by, taking most of the time talking. But here, we do even encourage people to say that, please, step back and step forward. And we explain this. We explain that we all came here, for the same purpose, and would like to hear every single person's voice. And when you speak more than others, actually you will be hindering those, introverts, from expressing what actually might benefit you who think that you know it. Or, of course, we don't put it in those words, but at least we say that every single person has an equal voice. And when they come to an agreement saying that, yes, we have endorsed these agreements, we paste them somewhere. And when we paste them, it becomes a responsibility of every single person in the room to actually make sure that those agreements are being observed by every single person, including the facilitators, the co-facilitators. So we just make sure that people get used to that, and we have not seen where people really do not respect that. So we are seeing people embracing this and using it in their families. They come and give us testimonies in churches, mosques, and at the government meetings. So we really appreciate seeing people respecting this kind of, controlling power imbalances in such gatherings. Thank you.
That's great. I think we have there's some great questions. I'm going to ask one that Janet is asking both Seth and Liz. How does gender, a favorite topic, factor into the work you're doing? How do you address the different roles of men and women in these processes? So maybe Seth, you want to go first, and then Liz.
All right, thank you very much. As you might have seen from the pictures Laura was sharing with us on the screen here, designing every single project you have worked together with the Karuna Center, and even on other projects I have managed or facilitated from other organizations, we do make sure that in our target communities, we do, speak with the leaders, community leaders, local government leaders, and of course, state government leaders, showing them the purpose of involving women first. So when we are running advocacies, we make sure that we indicate how we will involve women. So getting down to the communities, to the target communities, after getting that kind of permission and endorsement from government structures of leadership, then when we get down, of course, we sometimes do face some challenges of some women who do not have that self-esteem of participating or confidence of participating in these kinds of gatherings. But with the time, we do identify women of influence in those communities. They're always there to bring the women we are targeting together. And when we get a chance to speak with them through a couple of forums, then the fire catches. So we have seen women really arising and participating. I forgot to mention that recently we had a very, very wonderful, statement coming from some women whom we interacted with or facilitated a dialogue with in Benue State, who said that, we do not know what reflective structured dialogue has done to us. We used to always be fighting at, marketplaces. But this time around, we are not fighting anymore. We are just talking about peace, 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 peace. So we don't know how we have changed. And this shows us that at least the women we have targeted, they are the ones really who are spreading the gospel of peace building. And they call in some communities, because for our project, some communities, we are talking with women and youth, and the women say, we want our husbands to come and listen to what you people are telling us, how you facilitating it. And we have actually run some dialogue sessions that have been proposed by these target women. So that's basically how we go about it. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Liz.
Well, first of all, women have to be included. I mean, that's the first. It's, women have to have a seat at the table. They have to be included. We know the research shows there's been data on peace agreements that when women are included, they last longer. They're better agreements for everyone. More issues are taken into account. So, make sure they're at the table. That's the, and this is also discussed greatly in the Women, Peace and Security Act that has yet to be successfully implemented by the U.S. government in donors. But I mean, this is the whole point of it, to make sure they're there and have a meaningful role.
Okay. All right. I'm going to just ask one more, maybe two, but one. Khalid Kodi was a welcome. I hope he's still here. He's a new Karuna board member. Asks, what are your thoughts? And this is, to both of you. What are your thoughts on neutrality in conflicts? And of course, sometimes people use different words about talking about neutrality. I mean, that's kind of a tough question to ask. So do you have any thoughts on that? You can also pass. I'm just putting it out there. Either of you?
Well, I think that's the whole point of also conflict sensitivity, right? I mean, Mary Anderson did say it well. Anytime you go in and do something, you're not neutral, right? I mean, and I think that's what's been so humbling about doing this work in the United States. It's really, really hard. Now, on that account, I talked a little bit about the conflict sensitivity and how humanitarian workers and others, their whole point is we are not part of the conflict. We are there to be neutral. I agree with Mary Anderson. I don't think, you're always going to be neutral, but at least working in the United States, it showed us how hard it is and how humbling it is. So that's, I don't really have anything more to say. But
Okay. Yes. Okay. Seth, were you going to say something else?
Yes. I would just say one word that I used to tell people when it's all about, understanding the concept of neutrality in conflicts. So I as an implementer personally, without talking about, the donor or the funder and the beneficiary, first of all, the implementer sometimes also falls, in a certain trap of not being neutral when he or she is implementing the project. So here, I always tell people that it would be always good to empty your basket. Emptying your basket means, I'll just tell you an example. When I was in Nigeria implementing the interreligious project 2 years ago, people would look at me when I go to northern Nigeria, just dressed in Nigerian northern attires, and they say, "Oh, this young Fulani man, this is our brother." And when I go down the south of Nigeria, they now look at me and they call me Igbo, And to me, as a Rwandan, I don't want to be associated with any religion or any ethnic group. So inside my heart, I would be just burning. I say, these people want to take me back to our, fight of ethnic differences. So first of all, I would say, okay, these people are not yet transformed, just like me. So first, then when I understand that, I understand where they're coming from. Understanding where they're coming from, then that's when you start preparing the neutrality ground. And how do you do that? Is, giving them a room to express what they think is, a very, very strong value from where they're coming from, and then get the other person and share experiences. That is just in terms of bringing people together to, promote that kind of neutrality and make sure that at least they don't see you biased with the other group or associating yourself with the other group, because that's what they fight over. They pull you to different sides. So, and just an example, Rwanda, a country that has, so much divide among Hutus and Tutsis. When you go to a certain community, they will just look at your face and they will say, oh, this is maybe Hutu or this is a Tutsi, and he's talking about peace. Is he really going to be neutral? So first of all, explaining very well that process of getting the people equal with their voices, with getting a transparent forum, a sincere, where questions of sincerity and curiosity are being asked, where you, the facilitator, that they first identify with an ethnic group. They don't see that with you, then they start really accepting you, and they see that at least you're talking about, neutrality, and you are really not going to be biased with them. They start, accepting you. That's just in terms of practice as a practitioner. That's what I do to make sure that at least I deal with that issue while helping people to get together again.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry, we have a few more minutes to go, but I'm going to have to say no more questions. I'm sorry. I see Imam Sani raising your hand. I'm very apologetic. And Alyssa asked a great question about peace building and religious, getting religious organizations more involved in the US. But I think I do want to honor our commitment to trying to end as close to 5 o'clock. And it's of course 11 o'clock p.m. for Seth. So we're going to move on quickly for just a few minutes to wrap up. But I thank you, Liz and Seth. Those were both really, really interesting presentations and really complimentary. So it's just very, very interesting to hear your two different perspectives. So, okay, so we're going to turn the page here, so to speak, to kind of wrap up. And I just want to say this is kind of where we turn to you. We are, in addition to hearing from Seth and Liz, the really other part of our agenda is to extend our network and support to be able to do more of this kind of work in the future. So that's really the message here is we need you. And as we're looking forward to the next 5 years, we have two important goals, which is to both do more work here in the United States, because as a US-based peace building organization, we feel that it's incumbent on us to do more here, given the deepening divides and polarization that we're all highly aware of. So we're looking for ways to kind of build selectively on some of the work we're doing now in climate justice, on a Native American issues, and looking for areas where we can use our international experience, like working on countering violent extremism and how do we can bring that to the US. The other key area that we're going to be working on is finding new ways of deepening the work of collaborating with our international partners, where we have done a lot of training in the past. We see it that less as a focus going forward, and really looking at how we can build the capacity of our partner organizations. But we do need your help to do that. So as you see now, very briefly, we have a fall campaign, which is where you come in, which we're now launching with a really ambitious goal for us of raising $150,000. And to help to really give us the flexibility to do this kind of deeper work and be responsive to emergent needs, which we really cannot do with the very tightly focused government grants, which is where most of our funding comes from. So they're really very simple ways that you can help. Obviously, you can give money, which is always wonderful, but we really wanted to underscore that it's not just about money, but about helping introduce us to new supporters and networks of allies to sort of expand our network. And this is really going to be key to helping us do this. So really it's pretty simple in how you can do that. I mean, Audrey, I think, is going to drop a link into the chat. Thank you, Audrey. Audrey's our wonderful intern from Mount Holyoke College, as I may have mentioned, about how to give, but also she's going to put in another link, which sort of falls into all these things that you see down below, which is helping introduce Karuna to private foundations. If you have connections or know people, introduce us to new donors, host a Karuna connector kind of event like this, where we can bring staff or peace building experts from overseas or here to talk about the work, and to support our online campaign that will launch in November. So whether it's sharing our emails with networks and friends to join you in donating to Karuna, or sharing the campaign posts across social media. So there's a lot of different ways that you can help out. So finally and lastly, I just wanted to say that we put a lot of ideas right out there very quickly. And we know that not everyone is active on social media, or not everyone has connections and foundations or philanthropic organizations, but everybody does have people and organizations and affiliations that they could share Karuna's work with. So in closing, a huge thanks to all of you for attending. I really appreciate your time and your interest, and we'd love to hear from you. If you have big ideas or little ideas, send them to me, or specific ideas of people or organizations, you can reach out to me or Delia Kovac, our development manager, who is unfortunately ill today. And finally, maybe we can challenge you with a request to take one action after this meeting that will help expand our network. Every day, our peace building colleagues like Seth and many of you are working hard to build peace, and whatever you can do to support them and their work would be deeply appreciated, and an important contribution. So last but not least, we hope to see you at the next meeting on November 16th at 4 p.m. We'll be sending out something after this. And please invite anybody you know who's interested. So thank you all. I'm sorry we've gone 3 minutes beyond, but it was well worth hearing Seth and Liz. And I can't thank you all enough for being here today. So take care, and we hope to see you again.